welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is John Claridge. John, welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
Right, so we're currently huddled under your bivvy on the Cotswold Water Park. Obviously, we're not talking about this later on today, but if we... obviously, I thought it would be a good idea to mention a bit about your book and sort of some of the chapters that are in there, because obviously you fished some historic waters in the past, like Yateley, Pinchwood, etc. So tell us a bit about the book and we'll sort of go on from there, mate.
Yeah, I decided... it was published 2012, so 8 years ago. Never really thought about doing a book much before that.
Yeah.
But so I was been in the tackle trade quite a long time. I was at Premier Angling at Chippenham, it's no longer there now, but I was working there at the time, and I used to get quite a few customers come in after I'd had, they'd heard about capture and said, when are you gonna write a book then? And at the time, it was always a sort of pipe dream. I thought, when you looked at the likes of Tao and Nige and everyone that had been writing books, I just felt, where do you start, and there's not many publishers, and, most, if you look at Empress, who I went with, they do one book every year.
I suppose back then as well, it was a lot, in terms of self-publishing and stuff like that, it wasn't really a thing, was it, either?
No, either you had to have a lot of money back, to back or you needed someone that had faith to back you to do it.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't really feel that I would be that sellable at the time. I was doing a lot of magazine work, sort of Cartworld back then. I was writing most months. So the writing side of it, I didn't have an issue with. I felt, I could write a good story, but you always think, is someone going to...
Bit of self-doubt sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was at the time when I was sort of on Pinchwood, Foxpool. I was catching fish and catching big ones, but I thought I just need something. If you're going to do a book, you need something to sort of, seal it with something big.
Yeah.
So this was 2010. That October I caught the brute.
Right.
Which did sort of, after that, I thought, maybe I could then. Maybe I could, it would sort of finish it up nicely. It was, at the time, a good friend of mine, Martin Bowler, it was his 40th birthday party that he invited me to. I was chatting about it, and obviously he was one of the main ones I spoke to. Obviously he'd written books, he was writing Angling Times every week, as far as sort of media goes, journalism, that he's probably wrote more words on fishing than anyone else going. Yeah. And when I mentioned it to him, he said, well, I'll have a word with Cliff for you. And then it came about his birthday party, it was one January. He said Cliff was coming along. He said, I'll introduce you if you want, you can have a chat and see how it goes. Anyway, so went along, me and the missus, having a good time. Martin come along, was chatting to Martin, obviously the birthday boy, so he was tensions everywhere else, but he went and got Cliff, introduced me, and we had a chat. Cliff, absolutely smashing bloke, but he's not he doesn't know all the scene of the anglers. We had a good chat, said, plans of what we might be able to do, what we might be able to do. He said, leave it with me, I'll go back, speak to the boys, Paul and Tony, his sons, who do know people and would know whether there's a goer, basically. So, and about a week later, I think he rang me, I think. Said he'd spoken to Paul and Tony, they thought there was potentially, something that could, work and happen. So then it was the long task of actually physically putting the pen to paper. Yeah,
and did you, obviously you said you did a lot for magazines and everything else, did you have almost like a backlog, like a bit of a diary piece that you could take stuff from to prompt your memory?
Yeah, without that I would have struggled. I've got a very good memory as far as fish go, weights, what happened leads up to that thing. Yeah. But I used to always keep notes, book starts like in Frampton, 1990.
Right.
It's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind I was writing this sort of 9-10 years ago, so
Yeah.
stuff was 20 years old. And if I hadn't had all them notes that I'd kept,
Yeah.
it would have been a bit of guesswork.
Yeah.
But I was able to write it, all in date order,
Yeah.
all accurate weights, everything going, and the fact that I had written articles going back right then when I first done Frampton.
Mm-hmm.
Again, lead of events,
Yeah.
things that jog your memory.
Yeah.
Once you start doing, remember a capture, and then you remember what led up to that capture, everything. I used to have conditions and everything wrote down. So with that, and then in more recent times, magazine stuff that again sort of in date order. Again, brought all their memories flooding back.
Yeah.
Your magazine writing's obviously different to book writing. You're expanding a lot more in a book than magazines. Magazines want to know how you done it.
Yeah.
And
Limited space, I suppose. Yeah.
It's more.
How long did you fish Frampton for? Obviously, I don't want to give too much of the book away, but talk to us a little bit about it, because it's really a special place, isn't it?
Yeah. I used to live in Yateley. Mum and Dad moved away when I was leaving school, 16. We moved to a little village called Arlingham, which just happened to be, you have to drive through Frampton to get to Arlingham.
Right.
So like a little Hampshire, the River Severn. So moved there, didn't know anything about the area, fishing wise. 16, you didn't obviously the internet and waters and that, you just couldn't, research, you didn't have Google Earth to go scouring about looking for venues and such. When we drove down the Perryway through to Frampton, you could see a glint of water. So one day, my dad stopped one day and jumped the ditch, had a quick look, and then after that, when we moved, went and had a cycle round. Met a guy walking his dog, I think it was, on the field bank, and said, is there fishing on here? Do you know how to get? And he said, we need to speak to the guy up in the cottage at the end there. Managed to get my dad to give me a lift on the Saturday. Went and I was a 16-year-old kid, I'd fished at Yateley, but not really much for the carp.
Yeah.
I'd caught carp then up to sort of £20, but I didn't know what was in there. It was just a beautiful venue. Had a chat with John, he put me on the waiting list, and then I managed to get on the following year.
Oh wow.
And that's pretty much when the book starts.
Right.
From the sort of first glimpses of seeing the place.
Yeah.
I fished it for 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Time when I got cut short. Anyone that's read the book will know why.
Yeah.
So I won't give too much away. But, I was first couple of years, steep learning curve.
Yeah.
But I did catch every year that I was on there.
Right.
Sort of 3 to 5 fish first couple of years. And then caught a lot more the third year. And the fourth year I finally caught my first 30. At the time there was probably about 7 or 8 30s in there.
Yeah.
When you think of the waters now, 7 or 8 30s would be nothing.
Yeah.
But that was one of the premier waters, certainly in this area. Would have been the premier water by a country mile.
Yeah.
So I've had that sort of stamp of fish, and it did its first 40 my second year on there. And I had 2 30s that final season. So it was cut short, and then sort of went off looking, fished a lake just up the road.
Yeah.
I used to travel up to Wolverhampton, up to Cotswold Park.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, done a little bit on Guy's Lake Linear, which was the second year it opened.
Yeah.
And then went back home, so to speak, went back to Yateley.
Yeah.
So my brother was still living up that way. He was still fishing, kept in touch on what was happening. Group of friends still up there. I was catching regularly.
And what sort of what year was that? These sort of
97.
right. Well, that's when you were seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd been driving a few years there.
Yeah.
Just felt ready at that point. Since Frampton I'd flitted about, hadn't settled anywhere. There was nowhere that really, I was fishing nice lakes, but wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, you need that.
That
that
love
buzz.
affair sort of thing with a lake.
Yeah.
Which even to this day, if you haven't got a love affair with a lake,
Mm-hmm.
I think you always struggle a little bit.
Yeah,
But
those baiting missions and aren't quite there, and everything becomes a bit of an effort, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
So, lake I've recently fished and done very well. Just love the place and gelled and caught pretty much all of them. But without that to keep you there and understand it and just be happy there. There's a lot of places you're just there because there's a special fish in there. But if the lake's special as well, I think that's what you're looking for.
No, definitely, yeah.
And hopefully a special group of people as well on the banks. Always, if you get them three things together, special fish, really nice lake that you feel at home with, and a good group of lads. Yeah. Can't ask any more than that, really.
Definitely. Obviously, Yateley's got many famous lakes. How was it a big step up from Frampton or not? Because I suppose you almost sort of cut your teeth on that in terms of serious big fish.
Frampton's a big lake. Certainly the biggest lake I'd ever fish. I'd come from fishing small lakes. Yateley, they're all sort of... Match Lake was the biggest, which was 13, 14 acres. Most of the other lakes were under 10 acres. It was close range, very visual fishing. Frampton was a lot bigger. There was more long range stuff. Again, you had everything: shallows, deeps, snags, islands. So that sort of cut my teeth on there. Fished several other lakes and always caught fish, but no monsters in the time in them few years I was away. So Yateley, obviously, it was at the time when the old close season got abolished.
Right.
So you had obviously the north side of the road, where you had obviously North Car Park Pad Lake with the real big uns in, but that first close season they were Ramo.
Yeah.
People obviously from all over the country. Fish were coming out really regularly. Bazil was coming out virtually every week.
Right.
Even Arthur hadn't been out for years and came out twice that close season.
Sure.
They hadn't been fished for April and May before.
Yeah.
And it was
guard was down.
Clubbing seals.
Yeah.
So people say, "Oh, why don't you go over there? You might get a bigger." But I wanted to work my way up.
Right.
Yateley, it was always unwritten rule sort of thing.
Yeah.
That you went one step at a time.
Right.
Match, cut your teeth on the match, then you went to the cops, and then you went across the road, to the big boy lakes, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then people often used to fish them in different orders, but I wanted to do it like that. The match at the time had sort of 3 30-pounders in. I'd only caught 2 30-pounders up till then.
Right.
It was still chance of a PB on the match lake, and you had a bigger head of fish. It was a good head of 20s, and it, like I say, it gave you a good sort of grounding for the other lakes, and you earn sort of respect from the other anglers by doing it that way. So I'd walked the match in the Cops Lake dozens of times as a kid. I used to live about just over a mile away.
Oh, wow.
I used to cycle
it
after school.
Yeah.
That was one of my first sort of encounters of a big fish angler and a big fish. Was when I used to go along. Well, funny this was only yesterday. I was listening to Mickey Gray doing a podcast.
Oh yeah, I listened to that one.
Yeah, it's good. Mickey's a good lad.
Yeah.
But Mickey was on the match lake at the time.
Right.
And to go up to the Cops Lake, he used to go up to Dry Lakes Bank. And I remember it was quite a while because obviously he was doing the nights and then going to work.
Yeah.
And then days, he was just leaving the bivvy sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he was in the stump swim in the car park bay quite often. He used to say, and he always used to shout to you. Some of the guys over the other side of the road were a bit snide-nosed kid, I ain't got time for you sort of thing, and they basically blank you or be rude to you. But the lads on that side of the road, Mickey in particular, would give you the time of day, tell you a few things, and you'd always stop and have a few minutes chat before you going on. At the time, I used to be interested in the nursery lake, which never really used to get fished.
Right.
We used to climb the trees, and there was a couple of fish that were sort of low 30s, and then they were monsters. But it was visual, like hundreds of islands in there, and you used to be able to get up the trees and that, and find them. As a 15-year-old, it was heaven, really. One day I was there's a little tiny bay right next to the match on the Cops Lake. There was this guy fishing there, got chatting to him, and I can't remember what I said, but I said something, I think the conversation of Bazil came up, and I said, I can't remember how I put it, but something about, when Richie McDonald had it, and he looked at me, gave me a sideways glance and said, "That's me." Well, I always remembered Richie from like the Boilie Pole advert. It was on the Drennan Boilie Pole, wasn't it? And obviously he had his cap on, dark beard. Well, now he's got blonde hair, shoulder length hair, and looked totally different. So I didn't recognise him. And anyway, we got chatting, and Richie was salt of the earth. Every time we go up there, I didn't drink tea at the time, but he'd always offer you a cup of tea. He'd stand there chatting loads and loads, and I got on really well with him. In fact, one day when he was round in the natural bivvy swim, he was stalking a couple of carp. There was a couple of carp, and he went in. He was going to go under this bush. He was float fishing, just a little quill waggler, dropping it in, and he was sending me up the tree. There's silver birch there, so I was whipping up the tree and giving him a running commentary as to where they were coming in. Basically, the parrot, what he was after, and another fish, another 30, were circling around, coming in. And I got down the tree once, sort of wandered in, and calmness personified. He's just bent there with the rod over. I'm like, "You got one?" He's like, yeah. And it's like, I couldn't believe it. And then all of a sudden, the fish has gone out from under the bush, and he's had to swim out. So he's shouting to me, "Get the net." I'm like, "Where is the net?" And it was back in his swim, so I had to race back. I say he's cool as a cucumber, just sort of swimming down. It's only a shallow bay, something like 3-4 foot, so wading and half swimming back to the swim in the corner. I'm racing about with the net, chucks him in the net, and he scoops it up, and lo and behold, it was Crinkletail. And Mickey Gray was up in the pig swim at the time while he was on the Cops Lake, and he'd done the photos for him. But I'd say that was probably my first glimpse of a big, of a big carp.
I'd imagine that then, from then on,
yeah,
that was it.
Yeah, that's it. You've got the bug. You've seen one of the greatest, catch it and how to catch it, and but tiny part of being his, monkey going up the tree. You felt a small part of helping him, and so I always had the bug then.
And did you have your ticket by then or not?
I used to have a junior ticket when I was there. I used to fish it when I was on the nursery, but I say junior ticket was £12 or something. I used to get it was leisure sport back then. Obviously when I went back in 97, I can't remember if it was still leisure sport or RMC. I think it was RMC probably by then. But it wasn't a deer ticket back then, and you had the whole complex. It wasn't like you just bought a lake and then you had to buy to another one. You had the whole complex. So the match was the one I chose to fish, and I'd done well. But the Cops Lake was the following year. I decided to go on there, and I learned a hell of a lot on the Cops.
Right.
So didn't find it hard to get bites. Got bites quite quickly, but I lost quite a few. It was so tight and snaggy. Various reasons why thing, but I caught a few. But then that was the spring, and it was a sort of love-hate relationship. And then come the summer, because then in the spring, the following year, because the fish had got such a battering over the other side of the road, they closed it for April and May. So it runs the end of March and then started in June. But the match in the Cops Lake, you were allowed to day fish until June the 1st. So I was going up, bearing in mind it was a 100-mile drive. I'd go up on a Friday afternoon, fish the afternoon, evening, stay at my mates who lived in Yateley, and then we'd get up Saturday morning, sort of 6 o'clock on the gate, do all day Saturday, stay at Saturday night, and then do Sunday morning, and then I'd go sort of Sunday lunchtime. So a lot of effort, but I'd say that spring on the cops, I did get a few bites, had a few of the smaller ones, but when it come to nights, things changed, and I started, the visual side of things. I spent half my life up trees watching them.
Yeah.
It's very shallow lake, most of it was like 2 to 4 foot. You could see them in the weed beds, very big weed beds. Small stock, but for the size of the lake was only like 4 acres. You had a lot of a lot of incidents. You could see what the fish were doing, you could watch their patrol paths, and you could see what spots they were browsing on.
Right.
If you got a bait there, you could get a bite quite quickly. I was using sort of withy pool rig at the time, and no one really used it, I don't think, on there. And I think it was a sort of serious edge. They'd just been, it was such riggy fish, but because it was something totally different, that they weren't used to dealing with. It was catching. I had all the fish that year, bar crinkle, which was the main one I wanted to catch, the one I'd seen Richie catch. I lost it, and I know it was that because I see it pick the hook bait up from the top of a tree. Wasn't very high tree, it was just out on the silver birch bough. And it basically swam along, and without even almost ducking down, just sucked it up, and then it whizzed. I've jumped down, gone out to it you had to go through a gully to get out towards it, followed it out. It's gone solid in the weeds, so I've had to back, get the net, go out again, gone all the way out to the bit of weed where it was, and within 10 yards of it, it was popped out.
No.
I was properly sick.
Yeah. Was that your first big loss that you knew of, would you say?
Yeah, I'd lost 2 or 3 fish that felt powerful in the spring, but you hadn't seen them. It was because it was close range. Even the smaller ones would feel
like a
feel good when you're hooking them at 10, 20 yards. Certainly near snaggier areas, hitting old areas is sort of all or nothing. But that one, seeing that, knowing what it was, being the one that I'd always worked towards, there was, I caught the pretty one twice. I caught slate grey, I got scaly, spawned out just under 30, and they were the other 3 fish. 4th one was crinkle tail. It was catch crinkle, go for Bazil. And after losing it, a mate of mine became a really good friend on car park, and for edge fishing, I've never seen anyone like him. A guy called Little John Coxhead. He was on the cops at the same time, and he just margin fishes, pellet fishes in the edge. And his observation is second to none.
I've seen some of his pictures on Instagram.
And he was on, and he caught crinkle. Must have been about 3 or 4 weeks after I'd lost it. And I was in the Royal Box. It was hammering with rain, and I've just heard someone come in behind, sort of, it was on the wet, muddy path, because there were mud banks, and they used to get pitted up with, and you get all your stuff covered in dirt when it peed it down. And he's about midnight. He's come in one night. He's John. I got crinkles out. Oh, well done, mate. It was the one I wanted, so I was like, it's one of them. And gone round to do the photos for him. He was on the other side of the lake, and got it out, and the first thing I've done is look at his mouth. And there's this little tiny nick, and it was literally 5mm into the lip, and it just like torn out. Fairly fresh, obviously, hook mark, and you think that smaller margins, if that hook had been another 5mm further back in the lip, it would have been all over, because as I say, I'd plugged in a bit of weed. I could walk to the weed,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't have been long for if that would just had been another 5 mil. And I think it was basically because the fish was moving so fast, it just come up to it, stopped, ducked down, and
Just
Withy
sort of
would have nailed it properly.
Yeah.
But because it's
Sort of
almost
swooped it.
grabbed it,
Yeah.
smash and grab,
Yeah.
it hasn't hooked it properly. So yeah, I stayed on for a bit more, went well into sort of October. Again, found it in under the oak tree, got a rig in, had a small one, and then middle of that night again, ripped off, went out to the weed, had a bit of a job getting it in. Mate had to go round and sort of wade out past and sort of spooked out, and we got it in out the weed. By the time he got back to me, we got it in and netted it, and I thought it was Grinkle. Looked in, it was the pretty one again. So well up in weight at 34 that time, but it was a repeat, and it was like, is it going to happen? And I called it quits and went over the road.
Yeah.
Done a little bit of recceing on the north, and then went back the following spring after Big Bad Bazil.
Yeah. How did that one pan out? How old were you then at that point when you first started on that?
Cops was 90. I went on north properly in 99, so I'd have been 26.
Right.
So so I'd caught a PB out the Match Lake first year. I dropped scale at 34.9, which was an ounce bigger than one of the Frampton ones I'd had, the brown fish.
Yeah.
At 34.5. So I'd had a PB then.
Yeah.
But the gap between sort of mid 30, upper 30s, there was an upper 30 in the North Lake, and scale on the shoulder, and then obviously it was Bazil. There wasn't anything else in between.
Yeah.
But same with the other lakes, really. You didn't have the Mash and the Cops were fished to 34ish, but you didn't have like that. Ones with 36, 37, 38s in.
Yeah.
To sort of progress, and I'd always gone, whenever I'd beaten my PB previously, it was by a few ounces or a pound or two. I'd never been able to sort of jump anything much more than a couple of pound at a time. Bear in mind, I'd been carp fishing at this time. I was 26, so a good sort of decade.
Yeah.
These days there's that many big fish about, and that many well-stocked waters. People catch a 20 within, days of carp fishing,
Yeah, exactly.
let alone years.
Yeah.
And again, 30s as well.
Yeah.
You weren't spoiled for choice back then, So, I decided to go. And obviously Bazil wasn't getting any younger. It wasn't going to be there forever. It was like a now or never. You never know how long you're going to be on there. Although you're starting then, you could have been, old Bucks Fizz, he was there 13 years before he got it. So didn't go up, and he called it his best ever weight.
Yeah.
But,
I think I remember that Terry Owen saying about that on his thingy. Yeah.
Yeah. 49 something. And
That's some commitment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a large chunk of your life.
Yeah. So I think he's done pretty much the same thing on Dinton since.
Right.
But so you never know how long it was going to take. So decided to go on. My brother had caught Bazil previous year when I was on the Cops Lake. He'd gone over. He'd caught Jumbo out the Pad Lake. I think that was on his first night. It was spawned out at the time. I think it was 35 something.
Yeah.
Because the Pad Lake, where Jumbo had dropped quite a bit of weight, this was not long before they got moved. For whatever reasons, they seemed to be going backwards, and they decided to drain it, get the fish out, and they moved them to the North Lake. So you had scale on the shoulder. Jumbo actually died that first winter that it got put in. Didn't last very long at all. But it had again been dropping quite a bit of weight from its heyday of 40 to 43. It was now down to sort of 37s, 35s. So it was sort of on its way out, and obviously the move probably just finished it off.
Yeah.
But you had scale on the shoulder, which at the time was about 36, I think, 34 to 36. There was a couple of others, mid-20s, that got moved. So you had from the old days of the North, like when Tower was on there, and you had I think it was 9 fish or something.
Yeah.
There was more fish. There had been a few fish put in over the years, and you probably had 20 fish, something like that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously Bazil still, the snake had gone, so you had to go on the shoulder as second in command. And then there was a handful of sort of upper 20s. But again, you didn't have, like these days, you had one mid-40, you'd probably have 1 or 2 scraper 40s and a back up at 30s.
Yeah, back up at 30s.
You didn't have that.
Yeah.
So you weren't going to be, back up fish were scale on the shoulder or 20s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of went in the draw that first year. So it was June the 1st and opening. Sat up next to old mate Bernie Loftus, who I'd met on Frampton many years ago. One of carp fishing's proper characters is Bernie.
Yeah. I think I should get him on, shouldn't I?
Yeah, you got to hold it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're on an expert list and stroke pulling, he's your man.
Yeah.
So that was I've heard some splashing that first. I was in the corral that first week, and he was in waiting man's just next door.
Yeah.
And I heard this splashing of that one afternoon. What the bloody hell's that? And I've looked out, and Bernie's in his boxer shorts swimming out to the island, but the island was only literally 25 yards out, something like that. And he was out there, and he was sort of muddying up the margin bit and putting a bucket of imp or something on it.
Yeah.
And it was middle of the afternoon, broad daylight. Bernie's out doing his thing. And I actually caught one. I think it was the last morning. I think I might have been, because it was the start. I think I'd had a few days off, and I think it might have been three nights I'd done. Whereas back then I was working Dad's farm, so I was a strict weekender. I'd get off sort of, if I got done by sort of lunchtime, 2 o'clock maybe, and then it was booting it was an hour and a half drive to Yateley, so an hour and a half to hour and 3/4. So generally I'd get there on a Friday afternoon, sort of 4 o'clock, half 3, 4 o'clock. So I managed to beat a few that was sort of obviously finishing 5, half 5. And then I was back for Sunday lunch to do the farm Sunday afternoon, and then all week. So, but being the start, I think I managed to get a few days off. Can't remember what day the start started, but I think I'd done the third night. But on the last morning, I actually caught one, which was a 21, I think.
Nice.
Low 20.
Yeah.
One of the small ones that had come from the pad lake, and nice fish, but got it off to a start. That's the confidence thing, doing it right.
Did your approach change much going from one to the other? Did you change much?
Small things, yeah. Rig-wise, I tended to. So the match lake was pretty much sort of stiff rigs, bottom baits, hard bottom baits, sort of amnesia D-rig.
Yeah.
Over just boilie. Cops, but generally, at the time it's that you were rolling your own bait, and it was always used a bit more sparingly when you were rolling it yourself. And I used to fish over sort of 50 to 100 baits, sort of 18mm baits. Cops lake 20 was the winning thing for me. I always found to get around, the winning number was 20 baits on the Cops lake. You were fishing tiny little patches, sort of 3 foot square, little gravel humps and that. It's all catapult stuff, marker float. You weren't wrapping up or anything. It was marker float, fun spot. Back then you could get up a tree to see which side everything was on. it was pinpoint accuracy, you know. But I say it was like 20 to 40 yard cast most of it, you know. 70 yards was a big whack back then.
Yeah.
You know, I had 2.25 pound test curve rods. You know, it's different these days. Most of the time seem to be fishing 90, 100 yards, you know, but on the bigger pits. But back then it was all precision, little holes in the weed, little, what's that, Cotswold, the little shallow humps. Most of them I caught in like 2 foot water. You know, even at that range, it was, as soon as it hit, you know, to fill the lead down. Very shallow sort of thing, but they come in, you see the water rock, and quite often go, if you've got one right on there and you catapult a few baits right on top, you know, a couple of times you'd almost have like tails waving out of the water. It was that shallow.
Yeah.
But again, I took that sort of over the road, finding little holes in the weed. North Lake was generally deeper, so you weren't getting as visual thing, but there was 2 or 3 good climbing trees that you could witness, find the fish, see what weed beds they were using, and it's probably one of the things that sort of spot fishing, which I would say is my forte, and learning how to find them tiny spots and persisting, you know, not giving up. If you find there's a little hole there and you cast and cast and cast until you absolutely get it perfect.
Yeah.
Back then, I say you were using a marker float, you weren't using a straight lead. You know, it was the done thing, obviously, with a float, and you always, you know, if you don't get it perfect, the float will catch.
Yeah.
And then you've got the old age thing of pulling the braid up. You know, if you're fishing out any sort of distance, amount of times you get it on the spot and then the float wouldn't come up.
Yeah.
It was like I'm told it all the game.
Yeah.
But you got into that regime of it don't stop until it's right, you know. And if it took 5 casts or it took 55 casts, it took what it took.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm still like that today, really. But I steadily caught that summer through the fish. I'd Pad Lake 26 a couple of times. Works Bank was sort of, I always, whatever lake I get, you either get like a, whether it's a feeling or what, for an area, and the Works Bank was where I always sort of felt comfortable, and where I'd catch Bazil from. You had 3 main swims on the Works Bank, where you had 2 main swims and another swim in between. So you had the main works and the end works, and there was a swim in between called the middle works. And that very rarely used to get fished.
Right.
But when it was busy, you would occasionally get someone in there. But the end works was my favourite. You put you out towards 2 different islands and at the open water, and because the middle works hardly ever used to get fish, there was a nice shallow bar in close there, in between the 2 swims. You could fish there very much. It was only 2 rods back then.
Yeah.
Was it 3? Might be wrong now. Might have been 3. But the other side of the end, we generally 2 rods in a lot of the swims was more than enough, you know.
Yeah. Like cutting yourself off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Certainly, you know, at the time or so, it was just weekends, so 9 times out of 10, you'd have 7 or 8 on out of a dozen swims or something like that. So, you know, most of the time be fairly busy, so too many lines and you'd be doing yourself in. But yeah, carried on. September that year I had Scale on the Shoulder.
Nice.
And that was a PB. She was up in weight, really fat. It was 38.14. So I pushed into that upper 30 barrier.
Yeah.
And it was all building up, and it was one of them times where you felt close.
Yeah.
You know, you generally felt close. I've, you know, several waters over the years. You just feel everything starting to fall into place. And then I think it was the following weekend, I couldn't get up. I think that Scale on the Shoulder went, it was around harvest time, so we were getting the straw in. And I think I went up on the Saturday, couldn't fish the Friday night, went up on the Saturday and had to go on the shoulder the Sunday morning, and I think it was again the following weekend I couldn't get up and the lake was really busy. Went into the freeze and swim, found some nice spots, got them out, and then I've heard a whizzer over on the works bank, out the middle works, the swim I was talking about, because it was busy. Spike was in there, weeded him up for quite a while, and then eventually got it in, and it was Bazil. So as usual, everyone wound in, just got the rods in, wound in, went round, done the photos.
Yeah.
It's like, I've just had to get on the shoulder. Bazil's been out. We all deserted to the car park lane. So what was already a busy lake was suddenly a full lake on the car park. Did the Saturday night there and then disappeared Sunday morning. But say Bazil always had the potential that would, certainly that time of year, because it was the end of September, middle end of September, and would always come. You felt it had one more capture in it in October. So I think I did the following weekend and nothing, and then I got into the end works. I think it was the first weekend of October, and there was a frost due the following week. I think on the Monday they were talking about first frost. It's like now or never, really.
Yeah.
Got there and the lake wasn't too busy. It was a couple on. I think Rick was in the main works. There was a couple of others on. Dropped into the end works, but there was the big tree and the corral had split a bough, so they closed the swim. There's obviously health and safety.
Yeah.
In case it came down, and they had tree surgeons coming down the following week to cut it down. So with the corral being closed, it meant I could go a bit longer.
Right.
In the end works. It was still sort of end. It was like middle for diddle, like whichever angle you went. But if someone was in the corral, you probably wouldn't go out quite that far. So it was a bit close. But knowing no one could go in there, I searched out an area, and there was this tiny thin channel in the weed. First day, I found it wasn't too bad, and it was really windy over the weekend. I think just the undertow or whatever disturbed it. The Saturday afternoon, putting the rods out, it took quite a while. Got the float up there, but then it just got in the way. The spot was that small. Having a float there was just a nightmare. So you were just feeling for the drop. Being fair, I think it was probably about 5 foot deep. So you had enough time to feel it down, but because it was such a narrow channel, a foot too long, you were catching weed fronds. A couple of foot too short, and you were feeling it. You had to get it perfect to go down. So it wouldn't be quite as hard now. We were sort of wrapping up and clipping up and everything.
So what were you doing back then? Were you not even clipping up at all? Or were you just stopping it?
I did on that occasion clip up once I got to the float. Because I thought I can do it with a float. I cast to the to where the float was, but because it was so tight, and you were catching the float, I think I'd caught the float once or twice. Got the arse with it. I think I had put it in the clip. Obviously there was a cracked off marker float in the waiting man's island, and that was pretty much perfect to get on there. So it was quite windy on that afternoon as well. It took a few casts to get it in the channel. Nothing through the night. Sunday morning come, and I had one of the towels. 3 fish at the towel, and Jamie had put in there, and they were called the towels. I had one of them, probably about 7 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Weeded me initially, managed to get it in. Mate Odd was next door in the middle works, and Rick was in the main works. So we managed to get it in and get it in the net. That was 1912. Might be worth perhaps ringing home and saying I'll be back in the morning. Bear in mind, I say it was an hour and a half drive, and I had to get home sort of 8, 9 o'clock Monday morning. But I thought, well, the frosts are due, might be worth staying. And then literally about 10 o'clock, my right hand rod was to the little bar off the end of the dot island to the right. Absolutely wrenched round, and I had the pit 10 fish at just under 26. So 2 fish, it was good going on the North Lake, and potentially, Bazil could have been around. I had seen it in the weed previous week over, not too far away. So I went up to my mate Odd, so he packed up and that, went back to, because I used to keep some bait, we were on the same bait, I used to keep some of the bait in his freezer, just for such times when you run out. Went back, went up the shops, party bar, went back, got a kilo of boilie, came back, started putting it out in that afternoon. That channel would I think where I weeded the fish up, it moved even more, and it was so tiny, but if you could just get it to touch down, she was critically balanced, like wafters, basically. It was pop-up posts putting lead wire in them, so it just went down. It was a little silt channel in amongst the weed, and it must have taken that afternoon 40-50 casts to get it, and it wasn't a huge distance. It was like 75 yards, something like that. But it was sort of thick line back then, so it's probably big game or something. It's a bit wiry and that, cast the thing. But again, I just kept on going until I felt that touchdown. Once I felt that touchdown, I was happy. Catapult, Frimsticks, bait outs, can't remember. Along there, and then 4 o'clock that morning, absolutely ripped off. I thought I was the only one on the lake, but unknown to me, Mark Rosewell was round in the corral. But perfectly clear, silent night, and just me and the carp coming in, sort of thing. And it didn't weed me long. It absolutely ripped off, but then did nothing. It just came in literally like a dog on a lead. I've just waded out, pulled my trousers up, sort of thing. Waded out and netted it. Came back, I could tell it was a big fish, put my hand in. That's one of two, and then you turn it in the net, and in the moonlight you could just see scales along it. It's like, well, scale on the shoulder, ain't got scales along its flank. So you start bubbling up, is it? It's got to be. But
double, triple checking.
You need run in, stake the net, grab a torch, put the torch on. Wow, it is. Give it the biggest shout. Echoes right across the Blackwater Valley. But the thing was, there was obviously, or unbeknown to me, there was no one on the lake. There was a few on the car park, but not many, but no one heard me.
Right.
So didn't have mobile phones then. So it was a case of sack her up, go. I thought my mate Lee was on the car park, but I didn't know where he was. So I'm walking around the car park, and it was quiet for there. It was probably only 4 on or something, which was quiet for the car park then days. Walked down to the island swim. I thought, where is he? And I walked in, I could hear someone disturbed, and it was Ev, Dell's mate, from up north, and told him I've had Bazil. I said, you know where Lee is? He said, oh, he's I think he said he's round on Trumpton's, he's in the beach, I think. So I marched all the way round to Trumpton's, and woke Lee up and sat there, had a cup of tea and whatnot, and then as it was starting to get light, went back up, and I went back. He said, oh, I think Rosewell went up there earlier, so I've gone round to the corral, gone back the other way, and past Mark and woke him up, and he's gone, oh, I heard something earlier, he said, but I thought I was sleeping, I thought it was a nightmare. I said, it's a nightmare for you, because Mark had been in there a few years after Bazil. Let's go on the shoulder. So, it was his worst nightmare, and someone else had it in the sack. But that was
oh man,
the North Lake done. I think I had 9 fish that year, I think. So,
brilliant.
And did brilliantly.
What a fish.
So,
amazing, mate.
And then the real uphill struggle started.
Well, what I reckon we'll save that for the next episode.
No
there's definitely a part 2 coming, mate. That's been brilliant, John, and that's got the fire burning, because I'm just fishing over the road, so I'm going to go back, get my rods out for the night.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
We'll continue this next week, mate. Okay. John, brilliant, thank you very much.
Not a problem.